watched this from around the country and even around the world. We weren't there at the courthouse. Can you tell us what it was like at the courthouse? I mean, do you remember? Did you black out?
It was so my recollection is probably going to be a little different than Mr. Bott's. So we were in there. There was a status conference on the remaining clients, defendants, that weren't in the first trial. So I was just, I was excited to see some of the young men that were initially with us, that, Mr. Mender, Mr. Garlington, who I've known, and so, and others. And so I was just kind of being nosy. Mr. Bosch was with me, and then the light went on from the jury room. And I never knew this because I usually don't sit in the courtroom waiting on a verdict. I'm usually doing something else.
Yeah.
And apparently there's different colors.
Okay.
So the light was blue. And one of the DAs who I'm friendly with says, "Oh, don't worry. Blue just means a jury question."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, well, we don't have a verdict. It's just a jury question." So the judge kind of ended the status conference for those other gentlemen. And, then all of a sudden we took center stage, and she said, "We have a verdict. We have two verdicts." Wow. And I was just like, "What?"
Yeah.
And, I just wasn't expecting that, because I was expecting them to ask us to play some video or something again. So I was like, okay. So then I looked at Shannon, and I was like, I guess we have a verdict, Shannon. And then she read it so quickly for Mr. Kendrick.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then the date thing, I figured that out pretty quickly. I was like, wait a second, they found Mr. Kendrick not guilty yesterday, and I've noticed him kind of focusing on Shannon, but I was thinking there's no way they could have different verdicts for the 2015 case.
Yeah.
So I felt good about that. And then the judge said, "We have a guilty verdict on count 64. And I said, okay. And I was like 90% sure. My mind just left for a minute about what count 64 was. Of course, mm-hmm. I knew it, but it just wasn't computing at that moment. So then if you look, I went over to Doug and I said, you can't hear it, but I said, "Doug, count 64 is the gun charge, right?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he was happy, and he said, "I think so." And I was like, okay. So, but it worked out, and it was kind of a blackout moment. What do you remember, Mr. Botts?
Oh, I got
the judge said, "We have a guilty on the gun charge, count 64, and not guilty on all the other charges." That's exactly what she said. And so that was, to me, a major win.
Did you know at that moment? Because my mind just kind of left. Wasn't 100%. You knew. Okay.
And I said, whoa, because I was expecting, once you hear guilty, you say, oh, God, what's the next thing going to be? What's the other charge? But she just immediately followed that with a not guilty on all other charges, which was how the jury wrote the verdict. And so immediately I began to think, oh, God, he's going to get the maximum on the gun charge.
Mm-hmm.
State was asking to treat him as a recidivist, and the judge said, well, I have to give him the maximum as a recidivist. However, I can probate some of it.
Yes.
And so instead, she said, I'll give you the 10 years, which is the maximum, to serve 2 years, credit for time served, which he'd already served. And Max, before that verdict was reached, he asked to approach the judge, approached and said, if you're going to give him time, it's going to be a death sentence. You've got to give him, you got to do something. But then he said he noticed on the podium a sentencing manual that she had in front of her. And so he felt pretty good, and she kind of smiled and sent us back down for the sentencing. So it was actually a surprise all the way around for all of us. But probably the prosecution was more surprised than we were.
Well, I'll say this, just to put it in perspective. I had a feeling after when I went back, I had a feeling things were going to work out. But I want the public to understand, and I said this to the press the day of the verdict and sentencing. You, as judges, typically, when you go to trial, they're just instinct is to give the maximum. Like, you dared challenge the state. You know, some people call it a trial tax, and everyone says there's no trial tax, but, you know, in my experience, there is one.
Yeah.
So Judge Whitaker was so thoughtful in not just saying, okay, maximum 10 years, you take your 10 years. And I just thank her for that. And I give her so much credit for, you know, understanding the totality of this case and understanding that the jury completely rebuked all those other charges. And we're just dealing with one gun charge, and that was the appropriate sentence. Because, you know, other judges may have said, well, he was charged with all these other things, so I'm giving him the maximum. And that's not what she did. And we are so thankful for that. And that was not the easy thing to do.
And it sounded like for the people at home, there was a discussion up at the bench that we didn't see on camera, but that made you feel a little bit better going into the sentencing that she wasn't going to do that, right? Wasn't going to get the max. Can we be clear on that? This was like a bench
I'm not going to go into the specifics about what was said. I mean, it's going to be on a transcript, I'd imagine, because it was on the record. But I left that discussion. Let's just put it this way. I went back. I elbowed Shannon in the left ribs, as I'm prone to do. And I said, Shannon, it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And when you said you told the judge that any kind of sentence could be a death sentence for him, is that just because of the safety and the conditions of the jail or the prison? Or is it also because he had been acquitted of these charges and that could kind of put a mark on him in prison? Can you explain that?
At trial, we heard about 2 different attempts on his life. We also know that he was stabbed in the jail. We were never seriously considering a plea. But the understanding always, if there was going to be a plea, there was going to be facilitation from different agencies to make sure special accommodations were made for Shannon. So my concern was, if we're going to do the sentencing today, and it's going to be a sentence that's going to lead to incarceration, we can't do it today, because we have to get everything in place to facilitate that and keep him safe. But after that discussion, I felt like I was worrying about something I didn't need to worry about. Yeah. And I just need to sit down and let the sentence happen.
Because it seems pretty common in at least southern states that you have this kind of sentencing right after the verdict. Is that true? Is that pretty standard in Georgia State Court that you see that? Or is there usually prep time because you have issues that you want to argue about, like you were saying?
No, it's very common to do it right after. I'm trying to think. There may have been a couple cases where it hasn't happened immediately, but that I can think of, but it's definitely 99.9. It's right afterwards.
Yeah. So one of my questions was going to be about what was it like getting from point A to point B when you heard that there was a question or there was a verdict. But as you said, you were already in the courtroom when that happened. When you weren't in the courtroom, when you were waiting for the jury, where were you? Was there an attorney room where you all were? Or can you kind of talk about the tension of that or what you did?
Well, there was an attorney room, if you want to call it. It was kind of like a cubby hole. But
Mr. Botts didn't seem too stressed.
No, I felt pretty good about the case. I really did. And and that's what I said to Shaq before that day began, was I said, they'll come back with a verdict today.
Can I tell them where everyone sat in the side room? Mr. Botts had a couch. I'm just going to put it like that. We'll just leave it at that. Mr. Botts had a couch, and Doug. It was funny because Doug is the social media guy, so he's sitting there. Mr. Botts is
resting,
taking a rest throughout the whole process in the side room on the couch, and Doug is just jabbering on with people from across the nation, talking about who knows what on something live. And luckily, I can work with snoring and talking going on in the background. So I was just working on other cases for those days. And so it's the three of us, and then Shaq and Youssef, who is an intern that works for Mr. Harvey. He came. He wanted to be part of the team and stick with us. So that was awesome. And so it was the three of us, and then Youssef and Shaq. I think that was right. That was it. Yeah.
That was it.
Somebody says, Dee says, domino effect happening. 6 defendant charges dismissed today. You and Doug didn't just help your clients. So many others are winning because of y'all too. How does that feel to read that comment? And can you take responsibility?
I don't even know what whose charges was on this case?
I did see Damone Blaylock's RICO charge was dismissed. I haven't seen the others, but I have not been keeping up in the last couple of hours. Okay. But I did see Thugger Daily report had the paperwork for Damone Blaylock's RICO charge being dismissed. So it sounds like there could be others. Was that expected? Was there any talk about that?
I mean, there was no talk about the other gentlemen. I mean, we were in our own universe. We knew that they were at the jail, except for Mr. Farley. But there was no discussion about anything like that. I mean, the one thing I'll say is people have a lot of problems with RICO, and I get it. We know when RICO kind of came to prominence, it was definitely not this situation that we dealt with in this case. A lot of people have problems with the way it was used. Ultimately, people vote and make decisions and choose, who's going to use. But as attorneys, all we can do is just make it as difficult as possible. If you're gonna bring a RICO, we just gonna fight for every inch, and just make it as because while it gives in some ways gives the state great advantage, we can also, fight tooth and nail, and I think we did that, not just us, but all the attorneys, to make it a lot less palatable that they're going to try these other gentlemen, in a similar way.
Yeah, because one issue I've seen, and at least in this case, is, I mean, the Georgia Criminal Defense Bar and the number of attorneys who could take this case on, especially when you've got 28 defendants, was limited. So, I mean, it's almost like you got your domino effect is kind of helping the fact that maybe there weren't enough attorneys to go around. It's like if you can just eliminate some cases by the lawyering of attorneys in one case, there you go. But do you think you've inspired some a kind of change in the Georgia Defense Bar, or maybe kind of a rekindling of people who want to be defense attorneys in Atlanta?
I don't know. Most of the attorneys that I ran into were just like, it was just expressions of sorrow throughout this process. Like, Max, I'm sorry that you're still in this case. And, I always say, oh, it's not bad. I kind of liked it in many ways. But yeah, I don't think that necessarily we've inspired a bunch of attorneys that are going to be signing on to do 2+ year cases. I don't think that's going to happen. But
I see. State filed motions to nolle prosequi. All of the, I'm probably mispronounced that, all the charges for Cleef Adams. No, okay. Damone. Okay, dismissed. Damone Blaylock, Javaris Bradford, Justin Cobb, Javon Fleetwood, and Jaden Myrick. Some of them were charged with murder, weren't they?
Pretty much.
Mr. Bradford was.
Yeah.
Khalif Adams.
No, Khalif Adams was.
Well, he was.
Javaris Bradford was. And I never really understood what that murder charge was based on. So that's awesome. Mr. Cobb, I don't think he's even, I don't even know where he is or if he's been arrested, but apparently that solves that problem. And then, the other thing that we have these 28 names on this indictment, and the idea that this is a RICO enterprise, and I understand that under the laws of RICO, everyone doesn't need to know everyone, but in reality, if we're going to hold people accountable for the acts of others, you would think that people would know each other. And just look at the ages and the age range of this. It's like two different generations of young men that grew up on Cleveland Avenue. Really, it's almost like three different if you get into Antonio Sledge and some of the older guys, Demise McMullen. So it's a lot of these guys really didn't really have anything to do with Shannon Stillwell or Jeffrey Williams or anything. Like Jaden Myrick. He's was just a disturbed young man that was in the jail that apparently wanted to make some money, but no one knew who he was.
Yeah. You mentioned Antonio Sledge. Somebody questioned because it did seem like the prosecutors had really tried to figure something out in the last few months. I mean, their case was just way too big from the beginning, but we all saw the increased number of prosecutors, the presence of a body, the 19 witnesses in one day thing. But more significantly, we saw Antonio Sledge's probation revoked for not testifying in accordance to his plea deal. And we also saw Simone take a pretty pointed stance on during Antonio Sumlin's testimony and really use his plea deal to get him to say that YSL, she definitely used it to get him to say that YSL members sold drugs out of the web. Did that kind of aggressive stance by prosecutors with Mongtung influence any kind of plea deal negotiations? I mean, did it scare people basically?
I don't think so, because I think I could be wrong, but what did we have? 5 or 6 plea deals kind of come in succession. None of those, I think if it did anything, it made the attorneys take a hard line that we are not signing up to testify and we are not agreeing to factual acknowledgments, because none of those gentlemen signed any sort of acknowledgments to my knowledge and understanding. And so, it's just, and I know Mr. Sledge's attorney. He's a great guy. He's a great attorney. And where this really went wrong and how Mr. Sledge ended up in this situation is just everyone, state got up and said, these guys are all dangerous when it was time to go for a bond hearing, which was unbelievable to me, because no one's read the discovery like me, except for maybe Brian. And I still don't understand what Ghana did. And so you're saying all these people are so dangerous they can't get bond. And then so you just have them in there, and the only way out, other than 2.5-year trial, is entering a plea, and then the state writes the factual acknowledgments and puts it in front of them. And then, Mr. Sledge did sign it, but, we use these terms, it was freely and voluntarily given. It wasn't coercion, but, you're sitting in jail without bond and you're being told if you sign a document, you go home. Like, if that's not coercion, I don't know what is. So that's just and imagine being an attorney representing Mr. Sledge, where he wants to get home to his sick mother, he wants to get home to his kids, and you got these factual acknowledgments, and then you're trying to thread that needle to make it happen, but also chip away at these, and the state's being difficult, and then you just come to the conclusion, well, let's do this and you can explain it later, which is what was said. And I can see that happen. But to me, it's not on Attorney Wright's you know, and I understand why the judge did what she did with Mr. Sledge, and I'm not going to second guess Judge Whitaker, but the problem was these guys were all locked up without bond, and so they didn't really have options.
Yeah.
And then think about the other people. You know, we talked about this last time, Meghann, about people that weren't able to even get attorneys for so long. Like,
yeah,
it's just broken.
Yeah. And I don't, obviously you don't know firsthand the other people's situation, but I noticed Demekion Garlington wasn't one of the ones mentioned as having his charges dropped. And just based on everything we've heard in trial, that makes sense. But when I was looking at why he wasn't on trial in this case, I saw something about how it was because he didn't have a lawyer. That's why he was severed early on. Do you know, has that situation changed at all?
My understanding is, I think he has 2 lawyers now. One I know well, and he's a great lawyer. So, you know, hopefully things work out. But it looks like they're, you know, I have no inside information about any negotiations or anything going on.
Yeah. Do you think the attention that the trial got might have contributed to some lawyers taking attention to this case? Because before the circle was so small, it was criminal defense lawyers in the Atlanta area, but you've probably been contacted by, I mean, have you been contacted by attorneys around the country? Is there more interest in this from people trying to help or offer advice? Maybe unwanted advice.
Offer advice. Attorneys, no, I've received several dozens of emails from different attorneys, even from prosecutors, like from different states, saying, you know, keep fighting, keep pushing, and you know, and congratulatory emails when this came through. Now, advice, if I had hair, I would have pulled it out, because Meghann, I appreciate everyone.
Yeah.
But gosh darn it, the people, the internet sleuths that acted like I didn't know what was on that drinks video, and acting like I wasn't going to bring it up, and I needed to be told, and I needed to be tagged in every post, and I needed to be called, and voicemail after voicemail after voicemail from every state in the union. And our friend Thugger Daly actually did me a solid.
That. Yeah.
And he's like, I think Max knows what's on the video. Y'all can stop tagging him.
Yeah, let Max cook, I think he said.
Yeah. And I was so appreciative of that. I understand the interest, but it was kind of like, wait a second, I'm asking these questions in a way that are leading you to the conclusion, but you don't think I know what the conclusion is. Like, that's why I'm asking these questions. Yeah. And the other thing is, you know, I was kind of thinking I'm holding something in my pocket that maybe the other side might not be 100% on right now. So I'm like, y'all are telling my secret right now on the internet.
Right, because they made it pretty clear that they were paying attention to the social media hype. You know, I think that's one thing that could be studied in law schools, and there could be a big ABA journal article about what it was like for the attorneys and just the court staff and everyone to have so much publicity on this case, and how that changed things in the courtroom. I mean, or if it did. I mean, how it definitely changed things for you guys just in how you dealt with your everyday lives and kind of trying to deal with this. But did it change what you did in the courtroom, or help you, or sometimes hurt you, just as you worried it might become a distraction?
To me, no, I didn't pay attention to it. Max and some of the others were on constant look at the computer to see what comments were made during the trial. And some of the comments would be helpful, and some of them were just totally by people that were unaware of what was going on. But yeah, it has some influence. It's just the way things are nowadays, is that people do pay attention to social media. And a lot of the trial was all about social media.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
That the defendants had taken part. It was a huge part.
Well, that was one of my disagreements with Shannon, was the different feeds. I liked law and crime, when things were bad, I like getting the perspective of non-jurors. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of YSL fans and, you know, that they were always going to say, but there was some people that were more objective. And I like seeing negative comments because I know what's out there and what I need to worry about. But Shannon, he didn't like seeing negative comments. So he'd always want to get out of more. And I said, Shannon, seeing the negative comments helps us because we know what we need to do. But that was kind of a funny thing. But yeah.
How did the clients and Shannon and keep up with all the coverage? Was there, because I mean, we saw you guys at the defense table, and like you said, there is a legitimate legal strategy to reading these comments. It's not like you're just screwing around on the internet when you're doing that. So did you have set times that you would kind of do updates, or was it just periodic that you would look at things?
We would just look at things periodically.
Yeah. Gosh.
When you're not actually talking or cross-examining or presenting evidence or anything like that, and you got time, and there was a lot of kind of off time when we knew what the witnesses were going to say and what cross-examination would be, that we had to watch the trial and see the comments. And so, it was helpful. And Shannon was especially, you know, it's kind of boring sometimes to him. And so he would be active in the part of, in telling us things that they're saying, or what do you say about this? But we let him do that because that's what he's used to.
Yeah.
And plus, they were receiving nothing while in the jail, no newspapers, no updates, no news. So it was kind of refreshing for him to be able to watch something.
Oh, yeah.
Participate.
Yeah. Somebody, Ali asked, what led you to become a defense attorney, Max, and mentor young men and work with the Next Level Boys Academy? And if you can talk about what that is. They're in Atlanta, right?
Right. So the first part, what led me to become a defense attorney, I was one of those people that went to law school and I didn't know any lawyers and I didn't have it figured out. And I just couldn't see myself sitting in an office all day. That's just not me. I think people have seen my nervous energy and kind of the energy I walk around with, and I have trouble sitting still. So that wasn't really going to work. And then, you know, I think I told you this last time. In college, I just, the sweetest kid, the most humble kid, got charged with a federal crime. And, you know, all of a sudden we're playing basketball in the gym and he's got a ankle monitor on. And like, what? He got charged with and, you know, this is just a computer geek. And, you know, he got charged federally for some U.S. currency stuff that he was kind of dragged into by other people. He was just the guy who knew how to use a computer. And so I just thought that was very unfair. And that's kind of made me start thinking about criminal defense. And so I began as a public defender in Columbia, South Carolina, where I went to college. And, you know, I took the job very seriously. Next Level Boys Academy, I've been working with them for about 5 years now. And I'm a strong believer in, you know, be the change, don't talk about it, you know, take action. And Mr. Gary Davis, who heads that program, you know, he's just someone that's taken upon himself to not talk about it, but get young people together that have some challenges, a lot of them with the legal system, and, you know, just talk through things and build a sense of camaraderie and love and positivity. And, you know, so I love being part of that and just trying to, you know, make the world a better place.
You know, one gross generalization I've heard about juries is that after a verdict, when they're coming out to deliver the verdict, you can tell if they've acquitted a client or a defendant because they're willing to look over at the defendants. And did you have any of those superstitions or beliefs going in? And did you see any of that play out when the jury walked out? I mean, it was such a fast moment, but what were you thinking there from their body language or their looks? Anything?
Well, I've been around a little longer than Max, and so I can tell you that we always think that. But I watched every one of them come out, and only one really looked over our way and kind of grinned a little bit, but she was always in a happy mood anyway. And so I really couldn't tell. It was kind of like when they came out for questions. It was almost like they purposefully didn't look at us.
Right. Yeah, no, my experience was the same. I think I had slight eye contact with one of the jurors, but it wasn't anything that gave anything away. But I did notice, just in my experience, especially in a case like this, which I thought we had, you know, by the end of the trial, we had a very legitimate chance of winning. I felt in something that, in a case where the jurors had been around my client for over a year, I noticed that they did not seem to be tense, and they seemed to be kind of relieved when they came out, and I took that as a good sign. They didn't make any faces or anything, but they didn't have the look of a group of people that were sending someone that they had been around for a year to prison for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, the way the trial started out was we were surrounded by sheriffs and marshals in the courtroom everywhere.
Yeah, that's another good
There
point.
was about 10 of them in there that we would count. And when we came into the courtroom, we actually had our bags searched the second time. We had to go through the general population barrier, and they would, you know, go through the metal detectors and all that, and we clear it. And that gets you in any other place in the courtroom except for this trial, anywhere. And so when we go in there, they would pull out everything out of our bag that had already been searched by the metal detectors and the sheriff's deputies and everything. And then we go into the courtroom, and they're just standing all behind you and all of that. And yeah, we worried about what a jury would think about, well, these guys must be pretty bad.
Yeah.
If you got this many people trying to, or either something may happen in here.
Yeah.
And another thing that Mr. Botts, I think, is saying is when the verdict came in, when it's not going your way, you tend to see dozens of deputies all of a sudden in the room waiting for an emotional outburst or to tackle someone, and see all those deputies. So when I think back, that was a sign too, but I didn't really catch it at the time. I was just, you know, everything happened so fast.
And that's because a few of the sheriffs told us that we think you win in the case. And I remember one especially commented and complimented, really, Max on one of his brilliant cross-examinations of the witness. You got that right.
Wow.
And
do you remember who it was?
Now Mr. Botts is telling secrets. Mr. Botts, you don't remember anything.
Remember who the witness
secrets.
was?
Stop, Mr. Botts.
Can you say who the witness was?
he made a great cross-examination. That was not a secret.
Can you say who the witness was, just for the record, or?
No, it wasn't a witness. It was
he's saying,
or who the witness was that he cross-examined that the deputy complimented. We don't need the deputy's name.
Well, there was more than one, but there were several deputies that we got a good feeling from. The ones that were supposed to be guarding us, all of a sudden, I think became accustomed to, these guys are not any problem. They're not going to cause us any trouble. Right. And hopefully the jury picked up on that. Instead of somebody standing over them all the time, they'd actually talk with them and communicate, and they were humanized.
Right. And that was actually, you know, I put some thought into that, and I will say we put some thought into that, and I will say that the deputies that were in there were so professional, but and this but is not saying that they weren't professional, but they were also human. And so anytime there was a friendly interaction between Shannon and law enforcement, even if they're just playing around, because I mean, we all knew each other at that point for so long, and there's a level of trust and respect between the deputies and my client and the deputies in Jeffrey. The more interactions that are just normal, and it just looks like these are not hardened guys, but guys that even in this situation are able to interact with law enforcement and smile and joking kid, I thought it was good. And we did have some of that. And there needed to be some of that, because, you know, no one could go a year plus or 2 years and just everything's law and order and strict regiment. That was just unrealistic.
Yeah. Ashley asked if did one of the jurors wear a Boys in the Hood shirt the day the verdict was announced? Did you notice that, of all the details in the courtroom?
You know, I did notice it, and it didn't really stink. It was like, I was like, oh, okay. But then I was, you know, I didn't really take it for the message that probably.
And it was investigator. Sorry to interrupt. It was investigator Dennis, right? Who testified. Was it Dennis who testified
Right.
that he watched Boys in the Hood, and you know that was some of he had cited that in testimony, and then it was like, oh, so that's what informs your experience here is Boys in the Hood. But okay,
that was one of those clues that I could have probably picked up on, but again, I was on the verge of passing out. So
yeah, and you know, I mean, all hell breaks loose after a verdict is read. I remember a judge I know in Orange County said that he was once ordered to duck under the bench by the deputies because all the family members in the courtroom were freaking out. What was it like in the moments after the verdict? I mean, this was celebration overall, wasn't it? Except for the victims' families, but I understand Drinks' family left pretty quick.
I don't remember. I just remember hugging Shannon, and then I remember going to we spoke to the jurors, but it was kind of like I wasn't able to comprehend anything else that was going on around me at that point.
There was, I looked, and there was no reaction, because the visitors, the family, and all that were told by the judge that I'm going to read the verdict and I want absolutely no outbursts or no emotion or anything like that. And they honored that. So you heard nothing come from them.
And I'll say this, I try to always mention this, and you know, I don't know if it will. I'm saying this in good faith and trying to help. I don't know if it does in any way, but the Drinks family, they showed up every day towards the end, because that's when we were dealing with Mr. Drinks's death. And they've been through a lot.
Yeah.
And the Thomas family too. But I would see the Drinks family more, because it's a small hallway. I mean, it's a small hallway and everyone's in there. We got girlfriends, we got victims' families, we got attorneys running around. We have everyone in this small hallway. And so I'd walk past them and I would always kind of acknowledge them, shake my head, and they would acknowledge me and they would smile, and there was no animosity. And, you know, just a level of, obviously I'm doing my job, but some people don't take it that way. And the level of grace that some people show, it just kind of blows my mind. And, you know, I wish that family nothing but the best.
Yeah. Wow. That's,
I didn't talk to them, but they seem like very nice people.
That's good to hear, because that had to have been such a stressful situation for everyone involved to have, you know, the victims and the defendants all kind of right there in the mix. But it sounds like everybody was, there was never any major issue, it sounds like, that day or any other days.
No, there was not at all. And we need to get to a place at the end of this, and I'm working on it. We need to get a place where the verdict is the verdict, and all the back and forth and violence and street justice needs to stop.
Yes.
And we need to get to a point, and I don't know if we're there yet, where the jury's verdict is respected, and we're rooting for everyone to move on, to be productive and successful. And that includes Shannon, that includes Kenneth Copeland, that includes Jeffrey, that includes Kelvin Watts, that includes the Drinks family, the Thomas family. And that's where I want, there's needs to be some healing, and I hope we get there.
And what is Shannon's current situation right now? Because he's not out, but he has some pending cases, but it looks like they're getting resolved. Can you update us on that?
I've encouraged everyone to, and I hope my tone is reflecting that, to be humble and move with humility, and because Shannon does still have some matters. They are nothing like this. Yeah. I've had preliminary discussions. The prosecutors I've talked to have been nothing but professional, and I'm hoping that maybe by the end of next week, we'll be able to resolve those. Now, there's also the matter of what happens to Shannon at the end of this, when he is released. And I had a very long conversation. I love having these conversations. We couldn't have conversation. Shannon always wanted to talk about his future throughout this whole trial for 2 years. And I kept cutting him off because A, I wanted to focus on the case, but B, I'm just superstitious, and I didn't want to talk about your future while we're facing 2 life without paroles plus 1 million years. I said, we got to win this. And so now we're at that point. So yesterday we had a long talk about his future. I'm not going to reveal the details, but let's just say it was a discussion about staying off of social media. That's not real life. Yeah. It was a discussion about moving forward, being humble, moving with positivity and love, and being a family man and being there for your children. And he's very much interested in doing that. He's had a tough life, so it's not, everything is not, when people are trying to kill you for 8 years, it's easy for me to say that, but the reality is we are now in a situation where he can be a father for his children. He can be a husband. He can be a great grandson, and we're just working out the logistics. And I hope he seizes this opportunity, and he knows he has us in his corner. So,
yeah. And his kids were there in the courtroom for the verdict and sentencing. Were they?
Yes.
3?
4.
4. And some of them were teenagers. Or do you know how old they are? Various ages.
Various ages, but I would say, I think one of them might be a teenager now. Yeah. But they all love him dearly, and it's just a lot of, I don't know, man. It's a lot of good people. Even Miss Alexander testified. I don't know if that was the young lady whose gun. It was right. He was convicted of that one charge. It was registered to her, and we didn't even, in my closing, I didn't even fight that. That was for purposes of maintaining credibility with the jury. I didn't mention that because I didn't want to start arguing about something that was tough to argue. But my point, Miss Alexander, she shows up, and in some ways, she's had people were talking about her online, and she was showing up on those last days. She brought me a beautiful picture of me and Shannon that she got put on canvas.
Wow.
And she was just, and this is before the verdict came, and she was just so appreciative. And you know, his grandmother was there, and she was so appreciative. And so there's good people in his corner. It's just there's a lot of complications in his life
Yeah.
that we need to sort out. And I just want everyone to move forward in peace and love.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever been co-counsel with a client's wife before?
Oh, no.
Marriage,
And when I didn't mention Kayla, I didn't mean to leave her out. She's been very supportive too. The one thing that, you know, I'm just trying, you know, obviously she's excited about getting Shannon home. And, you know, I'm just trying to temper her enthusiasm with let's just stay off social media and let's just take it slow and be humble and work this out the way it needs to be worked out, and good things will happen.
Yes. Yeah. And like you were saying, there's still some cases to resolve, but you're hoping by the end of next week to have some
I hope so.
Some good news, or for him to be out, or either one would be great news, but you're hoping for some resolution by end of next week, you said?
Right. Yeah, I'm hoping.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. Well, somebody was saying Mr. Kokomo must be in Miami, but he
there's some sort of art festival or something. My wife explained it to me.
Yeah.
Because I told Mr. Kokomo he doesn't need to go to Miami, and then my wife said, cut him some. My wife is like his defense attorney. She said, cut him some slack. He's Art. There it is. Art Basil. There it is.
Yeah. The jury interviews, we are all seeing the jurors talk. And did you watch the big 3-hour interview that Melanie did with it was one juror and 2 alternates, and there's been some other discussions, but I'm wondering if anything surprised you from these interviews at all.
I saw parts. You're talking about the one that Shaq was on. I saw parts. I'm always worried about putting myself in an echo chamber. So a lot of people were saying online, ain't no way they're convicting. You know, this is nonsense. And, you know, I'm always more pessimistic. I was like, it's not that easy. We're not out the woods. But it was, and, you know, and I was like, well, these are people that are following me, which means they're rooting for us. So it's self-selecting group that's making these comments. But it was actually surprising to me how similar the views of those jurors were with all the people that were saying things online. I mean, that was really.
Yeah. Oh, I see people saying Kokomo's in the chat. Jack, if you check if you check your Instagram DMs, there should be a link to get into the StreamYard if you can. But we'll wait for you here. But one thing the trial has revealed, especially in the end, was, I mean, the third car and really the fourth car in the drinks video was arguably a defensive smoking gun. And did you guys see it that way going forward? I admittedly have not watched your opening statement since opening statements, but how much did those cars were they mentioned in the opening statements?
So first of all, Mr. Botts was the first one. He's gonna yell at me if I don't say this. Mr. Botts was the first one. Mr. Botts is really into cars, and he was the first one to really point out what we all eventually saw. But that being said, my recollection is opening statement, I said, you will see on video a client in the BP gas station having fun with his friends without a care in the world, nothing indicating that some homicide's about to take place. And then you will see a video from FedEx, and it's going to be grainy, but when it's all said and done, it will point to my client's innocence. I said something to that effect.
Okay.
But I didn't. I mean, Meghann, sometimes, and the public might not completely understand that, and that was potentially part of my frustration. Is sometimes you hold things in your pocket until it's time, and so the video and the intricacies of the video and the details in the video were something that I was holding. We never had any discussions about that with the state, trying to get a resolution, like look at the video. We held that to ourselves.
And that was a strategy because we weren't sure exactly what the expert witnesses and all that were going to say.
Right.
And so we had our defense, but he didn't portray it in the opening statement because that would have locked him in.
And also it would have potentially, affected testimony of people later. But once
don't give away your strategy.
Right. But once the ME gave her honest testimony and talked about the effects of that gunshot wound and immediately losing any ability to consciously move your body, and such as moving your foot up and down, at that point I was like, okay, we got what we need. It's a full go. Yeah. And so, but I was holding on, we were just kind of, holding on to that one in our back pocket, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I see somebody saying I should email Shaq the link. I don't have his email, but if he drops it in the chat, I'll try to get him the link.
Do people really want Shaq? Is that, I mean, really?
I think he's kind of the, I think there are a lot of people who want to see him, but do you remember, I can't imagine you forgot about that, but I think it might still be my favorite moment in trial when Judge Glanville yelled at you, Attorney Botts, and you just kind of let it roll off your back. You didn't seem to mind.
It did roll off my back. He never bothered me and never has. And he knows that I've respected him as a judge, but that particular time he was really not doing right. He was out of order. I was trying to tell him something, and that had happened in the hall that was relevant to one of the rulings, and that was when he was getting into the rift with Brian also. And he said something like, I don't care for you anymore, or something like that. And I said, well, I don't care.
Yeah, that's fine.
You said that's fine.
I said that's fine. If you want to feel that way, but I've done what I had to do.
And one of our supporters made T-shirts for all of us, and I think he's got a T-shirt that said like "That's fine" or something.
Well, it says "I don't care for you anymore" or something like that, and I had on the back of it, "That's fine." But also, I took up for Max in front of him too, at the beginning of the trial when he falsely accused Mac and Shannon.
The one day the cameras weren't there, I almost got locked up, and people don't know about that. But but Mr.
Was that mentioned was there a filing about that? I seem to remember reading about this.
It was in my motion. What was it? The motion for mistrial with prejudice, where I laid out all my grievances. But I was accused of yelling at the judge in open court, and I didn't. And then apologies were demanded, and we went through this big thing about you're lying to the court, and I said no, you're asking me to lie to the court. And so we just went through this big thing, and Mr. Botts, without saying exactly what happened, Mr. Botts cleared it up eventually, and I was not locked up.
Yeah.
But I was right, and Max was right, and I had to do something and say something because I really at first was astounded that he was doing that to Max in front of everybody and accuse him of something that I know he didn't do and had nothing to do with. Shannon actually did it.
See, why would you say that?
Because I had to tell him that I've got to say this about Max and take up for him. So it may not go well, but I've got to do it. It's what's right.
And Shannon wanted to take responsibility for it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Let me just be clear. And I told Shannon, no, you're not going to take responsibility. And then so I was up there potentially going to get arrested. And finally, while I was up there, Mr. Botts and Shannon discussed it, and Shannon convinced Mr. Botts, or maybe Mr. Botts thought it was the right thing to do. He said what really happened.
Was that the start of a beautiful friendship between you and Judge Glanville? Is that what started it all? Would you say?
I like Judge Glanville. I don't know what happened in this case. I don't want to say anything bad about Judge Glanville. And I don't want to be petty. I felt like at some point I kind of became the dog that everyone kicks. And that's fine. I didn't mind that. In fact, in some ways, I think the jury picked up on that. And that was cool, actually. I was like, that's fine. But
yeah,
it just started to affect things when I couldn't ask questions on cross-examination. And everything was vague, no matter how specific I asked something. And so I never really was like, I think Investigator Gaither, I never really got to ask questions. And that was a little bit frustrating.
Now, just as somebody who watched the trial from afar, the change in judges really seemed to bring about a night and day difference in the trial and just how it was run. I mean, did you guys see that firsthand, and how were your lives affected by the new schedule the judge implemented?
Well, I'll tell you, it went from we're going at a leisurely pace and I am always prepared, because two things happened. Judge Whitaker came on and she did a great job, but she was strict, 9 to 5:30, 2 breaks and a lunch break. And the lunch was, an hour. But the other thing that happened shortly thereafter is all my friends, or most of my friends, their clients took plea deals. And so the overlooked part of that was not only that it eliminated quote unquote defendants, clients, but it eliminated defense attorneys. So the division of labor, like myself and Brian, we had a great division of labor going on. And all of a sudden, my buddy was gone, and Mr. Adams was gone, and the Matthews were gone, and Miss D. Williams was gone, and Gardner, all of them were gone, and Mr. Harvey. And then I look over, and it's just me and Doug and Mr. Botts and Shaq. And, that changed things, because it was all of a sudden a lot more was going to be on us, and we were the only ones. And so, we just kind of looked at each other and said, I guess it's us. Let's do it.
And I think that probably the plea negotiations and all began when Judge Whitaker kind of told the prosecution, y'all have gone too far, and I may grant a mistrial here, which was what everybody was asking for at that time. And she said, I think y'all better have some discussions.
Yes.
And that is the only reason that we were actually brought together and able to communicate somewhat with the prosecution. So some of them were able to work out deals. And I think in the end, if you think back, is that a jury, they're not supposed to know what happened, because they're not allowed to read, see, or do anything. So if you look at it the way it should be looked at, is that they did not know about Thug pleading guilty. Jeffrey Williams and everybody pleading, getting deals, pleading guilty to this and that. They may have thought when they came back in and saw only 2 left, and the judge had to tell them, you're not supposed to concern yourself with just what happened. There's just some of them that are not here anymore, and these are the only 2 left. Some of them may have thought that the cases were dismissed against the other people for lack of evidence or whatever. I don't know. And that would have helped us if they're saying, well, if all the rest of them are gone, what are we left with? Why are they still here?
I never looked at it that way. I thought that the jurors would assume that pleas were rendered, but
Mhm.
You know, and that can be a negative, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, these
They're like,
guys,
oh, these guys are the worst of the worst if they're still here. kind of
or these other guys admitted and these guys aren't. But I kind of viewed it as, you know what, we're the, and I'm not throwing shade at anyone else, so please don't take it that way. I support
Yeah.
everyone that came to a plea agreement, and the reality is we never had at all a reasonable offer. So that was the difference with us.
Because sorry, for the masses, the final offer was what, 60 years to serve 40, right? And it would reduce the murder counts to involuntary manslaughter. But I mean, so what when you
voluntary? But I don't really want to reveal the numbers, but they were astronomical. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so we never had any realistic thoughts of pleading. You know, of course you have to convey the offer, but we gonna fight. And so the way I looked at it is, maybe the jurors, if they have doubts and they're on our side a little bit, maybe they're looking at it not like, oh, everyone else pled guilty because everyone's guilty, but dang, these two guys are standing up strong, and they've you know, straightened their backs and puffed their chests out, and you know, sometimes people like that.
Yeah.
And that's brave to do. And so I viewed it as a potential positive that we were the only two there.
Yeah, me too. And ironically, is that Shannon had said to me all along, I wouldn't even take probation.
Stop. Will you stop?
And he got probation.
Mr. Botts, man.
Getting into the gritty of the notes. I see somebody asked, and we've had a lot of requests for this. What was the state's reaction for the verdict, other than just were their faces just or somebody run out of the courtroom? How did the prosecutors react when the verdict was read?
Mr. Botts, please don't answer this. No. If it's gonna be petty.
It wasn't.
No
reaction.
Please do.
I didn't pay any attention. Certain prosecutors came up to me afterwards and congratulated me, and that was very professional of them.
Yeah. Good. Who do you want to play you in the movie? Is there? I mean,
what movie?
It's not crazy to think that there could be some kind of creative venture on this. Have you guys had any contacts from anybody, or not that you would want to say, but is his Hollywood called?
I'll say no, but I haven't really. I've got so many messages on my phone, and I'm playing catch up. Messages are coming in faster than I can really clear them. But no, I saw something on the internet where people were saying who's going to play who, and they had the transporter guy, and I was like, the transporter guy really does look like me.
Yeah,
maybe that guy.
Yeah, you know.
Someone put Matthew McConaughey. Oh man, my mother-in-law would go crazy if that happened.
I wanted to ask about. Did you stay in touch with the other attorneys, because they had to have been prepared for some of the witnesses that were coming up? So, I mean, were you talking to Brian Steele about other witnesses when they were coming up, and what his preparation was for that?
I talked to Brian Steele 5 times a day. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but the message that he always gave, Brian is a very high energy individual, and he's a very positive individual. And he would just say, stay strong. I am so proud of you.
Yeah. That leads me to somebody wants to know what it was like to work alongside him. I mean, it was terrible, right? You hated it. Or what can you talk about what it was like to work alongside him? And do you think he's one of the best trial lawyers in the country?
I think he is the best trial lawyer in the country. And the reason I say that is not because of what happens in court, is what happens out of court.
Yeah.
Being with him throughout this process made me better, because I said, how am I going to let Brian do that? And I'm not there with him. So you think a big thing discrediting investigator Viverito. 12 24M on an end's head. You think that just like comes out of nowhere? That's from Brian or someone else on the team scrolling through so much stuff to figure out exactly what Jeffrey was talking about at that moment, and then linking it up to something that was on the internet at that moment.
Yeah.
And
that's the little Uzi Vert diamond in the head.
And that's just one example, but there's so much stuff that if that time isn't spent outside of court checking behind everything, that flies in front of the jury. And all of a sudden Jeffrey's talking about ordering a hit. But it's all that out of court time, all the people you talk to, the amount of time that you spend with your client going through everything and fully understanding the case. That's what leads to those in-court revelations. And I was able to piggyback, especially dealing with we were able to piggyback, especially dealing with the gang investigators on a lot of those things that had come up earlier through Brian and Keith's efforts. Mm-hmm. and the team. Trisha Renard was the jury consultant. People were calling her YSL Granny, I think, but she was. People say I knew the discovery, like on the next level, but Trisha knew the discovery on the next level.
And Trisha was the woman that we always saw sitting next. Was she the woman sitting next to Young Thug?
Yeah, or next to Keith. Next to
Keith. And she used to be an ALM reporter, right? Wasn't she at the Daily Report? And,
yes.
The legal newspaper. So kind of segued into legal work that way. But so, I mean, you all become kind of a dysfunctional court family when this all happened. So it had to have been almost kind of like a weird divorce when the other defendants left. But like you said, you were able to all stay in touch with everyone.
Right. And it was just complete support. Nicole Westmoreland would check on me daily. Lamar Gardner, Lamar, all we did the whole time was bicker, fussing each other the whole trial. And then as soon as he was done, he showed me what our relationship really was because he was checking on me.
Yeah.
So,
well,
and Bruce,
Ali from Tennessee says, watching you during the trial was fascinating. Your passion is one of a kind. I have so much respect, and I cried my eyes out when you and Shannon hugged after the verdict. God bless you. I know we've talked before that you black out in those moments and don't remember it. But I mean, his kids were in the courtroom. His grandmother was in the courtroom. Did you talk to them afterward, or what were those moments like after the hug and before was he taken back to a holding cell still, or how quick
he was and I didn't get to talk to him afterwards because I was just getting pulled in so many directions, but that's why I went out. What was it, yesterday, or I went the day after the verdict and we had a long talk. But his grandmother was there and his kids, and Kayla was there, and other young ladies that are his exes were there supporting him. But it's really not like, it wasn't a show or anything like that. It was, it was Miss Alexander, and there's another young lady, I don't really want to say her name, but she's known Shannon for probably 15 years, and they used to date, and she showed up. You heard her on some of the jail calls, and it was just everyone was getting along, and it was just, and I've tried to stress to Shannon the level of support he had.
Yeah.
Or has, so he fully understands that he's not alone.
Yeah. I see somebody say, and of course they're kidding here, but it does remind me of that when you get thrust into the national spotlight and as an attorney in these cases, I mean, are you getting offers to do out of state cases that really are kind of out of your repertoire, or or how is your practice expanding here?
Well, I mean, this has happened. I think, I think that probably potential clients, even if they were impressed, they knew that I was very busy at that exact moment. So now, we'll see. We'll see how things change. But I'm just so grateful that, the bottom line is in criminal defense, there's cases that you can do a A++++ job and still lose the case. Or, just the strength of the evidence, or, one juror you got wrong. And then there's times where attorneys can do a D- job and win a case.
Yeah.
So it's just, I know the work that we put in on this case. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to see the results reflect the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody says it was incredible watching how hard you worked, and it truly inspired me to put all my into what I do.